What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today, cool video for you guys. I am joined by coach, author, and X's and O's guru, Mr. Bobby Peters himself. Basically, he publishes playbooks of several NFL teams every offseason, so there's really no one more qualified, aside from Arthur Smith himself, that I could really have to join me on here to discuss, the foundation of Arthur Smith's offense. I'm really excited about this deep dive that we're going to do. Just before we get started, y'all know the drill, man. Please make sure that you like the video, subscribe, drop a comment to support the channel. Bobby, I appreciate you taking the time, man, to jump on here with me, talk some ball. How you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. I'm excited. Through especially the first couple weeks of the season last year, I thought I'd be writing a book about the Arthur Smith 2023 Falcons, but then things kind of, halfway through the season started to fall apart for different reasons. And after week 9, week 10, I stopped. I stopped doing the deep dives that I was doing, every week cutting them up or whatever, and labeling the clips and all that good stuff. But no, they definitely did a lot of good stuff, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, heck yeah, man. It's definitely cool. Bobby has a Substack, and I'll link all of his work kind of in the description of the video to all the books that he publishes, his Substack, which he puts out a lot of scheme content, a lot of X's and O's stuff that we do here on the channel. So he's taught me a lot about ball over the past couple off seasons since I've kind of followed him from afar. So let's talk. Let's get right to it, man. Let's talk about kind of the foundation of Arthur's offense, really the wide zone stuff. I want to talk about kind of break this up into two different segments. Why his wide zone offense, that rushing attack really works, and then kind of the part two to that is like what do you think gives it problems?
Yeah, so why it works, I think the details of the coaching is kind of the starting point where I go, right? Like when you turn on the film, a lot of teams, and I mean honestly most teams run outside zone or wide zone, and it's the base run scheme of the NFL. Like if you had to pick one, I mean I don't know what the actual numbers say, but anecdotally that's what it looks like, right? Um, and they're well coached in it. The offensive line, they're when they're working to, so on outside zone, every offensive lineman has a landmark to work to on a defensive lineman, right? So whether it's a single block or a double team block, whether it's the play side shoulder, play side armpit, play side number, they're trying to reach their defense, the defensive lineman in front of them. That's why it's called outside zone. We're trying to get outside, so we're trying to reach block. And with certain offensive lines, you can tell based on how they try to do this with their footwork. You always hear coaches say, play on the other side of the line of scrimmage. Well, on outside zone, we want to get outside of the defense, but at the same time, we still want to play on the other side of the line of scrimmage. So the teams that run outside or wide zone the best are the ones that still get vertical on it while still reaching. It kind of looks more of like a diagonal in actuality. So things like that. And then also like the running backs, like, obviously getting the most out of, before Bijan Robinson got there, getting the most out of like Tyler Algier and other running backs that they had, pressing their landmarks, pressing their aiming points, to find the open lane on outside zone. So those are probably a couple of the reasons why they had success with that. And then the other thing is they complement it well too with other run schemes. Like I think, some of the stuff I'm sure we'll get into, some of the counter wineback stuff, and then even duo. They were a pretty solid duo team. Bijan Robinson's a very good duo runner himself. So, complementing it with different run schemes to still have obviously there were definitely limitations with the passing game, but if you have a well-rounded rushing attack, you can still run the ball even though defenses know you're going to run it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like teams, I mean, I feel like, Arthur's been around for a long time now. He was a coordinator for 2 years in Tennessee before being the head coach at Atlanta. He was still the play caller. So really we've got 5 years of kind of a sample size of what his offense looks like. You're going to get a lot of heavy personnel, it's a lot of 12, 13 multi-tight ends. He mixes in, multi-backs, like some pony stuff, which we went over that a little bit earlier this week on the channel. And, some of the things that I like too, like you mentioned the aiming points. Kind of the aiming points for all wide zone teams, kind of for the offensive linemen, always seem to pop up in terms of like aiming for the play side shoulder, the play side number, like you were mentioning. I thought you brought up a good point too, because I was watching a clinic by Arthur Smith. This was months ago after the hire, and one of the things he talked about was wanting to get vertical. And the whole thing about wide zones, you want to make the defense defend sideline to sideline. You want the stretch, but at the same time, you do have to cross the line of scrimmage and get that vertical displacement as well. So I think that's a key aiming point. And then with the running backs, like when you have talented running backs, they got the most out of a guy like Algier, who's a day 3 pick. But then, having guys like Derrick Henry, Bijan Robinson, you got talented running backs. It makes sense to put the responsibility kind of in their hands because, their aiming points, the ghost tight end, but it's really one gap at a time. They have the freedom to hit it wherever the free rushing space opens. So I think, putting the responsibility on those guys makes a lot of sense. But, this could be specific to Arthur Smith or just like some of the stuff that you've seen and studying other NFL offenses over the years. Like, what do you think NFL offenses are doing maybe like in 2023, 2024 to kind of give wide zone some problems?
So defensively, I think kind of the shift to more too high coverages is one of the, outside zone is great. Whenever we hear, oh, it's bad to run the ball against an 8-man box or a loaded box. Well, outside zone, you can still run the ball against single high looks because you're leaving that backside defensive end unblocked and you're leaving the free safety unblocked in the deep third of the field. So you can still get a hat for a hat at the point of attack. Now, when defenses get into cover 2, cover 4 type coverages, what they're trying to do is they're trying to manipulate the front and their second level defenders to get the ball to a late fitting secondary defender, right? And they're trying to manipulate that to get the running back to go to the gap that they want him to go to, whether that be with, different stunts, different linebacker movements, or even secondary rotations, right? So with that said, the stunts are a lot harder for offensive lines to pick up an outside zone, depending on the type of stunt and, with the different calls that the offensive line might have with it too. And then obviously you're playing into the defense's hands in that sense where, with, to compare it to like a gap scheme like duo or power, you can wash it all down and you get your running back to that gap a lot quicker. And you can even get the running back going downhill quicker, so that's why gap schemes, generally speaking, make more sense against too high looks as opposed to one high. So that's probably why I think there's been a little bit of a slowdown or a little bit of a, probably a little bit of a slowdown in the success of wide zone.
Yeah, it's a good point. I was talking about this because it's really been a focus for me over the past couple months, just learning a little bit more about the wide zone stuff because the Steelers haven't ran a ton of it, just recent coordinators, recent personnel groupings that they've had. But I was talking to Cody Alexander at Match Quarters just about some of the wide zone stuff as well, and he was mentioning just the pivot to kind of some wide 9 stuff. Defenses playing really heavy on the edge in terms of they're getting a lot more depth or a lot more width, I should say, but also playing really heavy on the perimeter. And then, just the 5-man surfaces it can cause some issues because, you think about it, if you're running, just 5 offensive linemen, depending on what personnel you're in, it doesn't exactly leave like a free guy to get to the second level, to get to that place at linebacker, et cetera, et cetera. But you mentioned a good point. Like just a lot of NFL defenses right now, they're trying to base out of those too high shells to slow down some of the explosive passing attacks. Even though Arthur Smith, I feel like he does a good job getting those regulated looks. He sees a lot of cover 3. But I mean, they still, like you mentioned, you can run the ball against those 8-man fronts, but still, I think there's some work to be done in that regard. But yeah, it's good stuff right there. In terms of like his favorite counters to the wide zone stuff, I know you've posted a lot of stuff on your Substack that I've been, peeping as well. But what are some of his favorite counters in the run game to, the outside zone that he runs?
Yeah, so 2 cut-ups that I've got on the Substack currently. So my one favorite concept from studying Arthur Smith's offense last year was I use the general term like counter wind back. So it looks like full flow outside zone going one way, and then either the backside guard or the center, depending on the front and who's uncovered, will kind of loop back around to try to reach that backside defensive end. And then, the running back will take like 3 hard steps going, one way, and then he'll, instead of working like traditional counter where he's going to work downhill and try to hit like the play, like front side A gap, he'll take a wider path and the ball will try to bounce outside the backside defensive end. So that's probably one of my favorite ones. And Bijan Robinson had some sweet cuts on that play last year. I mean, he read that block, that pull block from that backside guard or center beautifully on multiple occasions. It was some teach tape for that concept, and they were pretty efficient with it too. So that's one of them. Split flow outside zone's another one. So like usually when defenses see split flow, it's usually split flow inside zone. So they're trying to fall back a gap, stay more vertical. When offenses call split flow outside zone, it really forces the second level defenders. Okay, I've got the offensive line flowing one way, hard horizontally, but I also might have to fall back a gap, to account for that tight end working backside. So that they were very efficient with that concept as well. They had some nice runs on that, and then a variation off of that I thought was really nifty that they ran a lot. I think it was week 2 against the Packers, I want to say, is a concept that it looks exactly like split flow outside zones. The offensive line's working one way. The tight end on the front side is going to slice across to the backside of the formation. But instead of slicing all the way past the backside tackle to the defensive end, they would have him slice like the nose guard. So it wasn't quite like a wham block, like on a play side 3 technique, but it
Hmm.
wasn't quite split zone. It was kind of like, kind of like a tweener concept where the offensive line's still blocking zone. And that really messed with linebackers. They were able to hit some nice creases on the front side and both right behind that tight end slicing too. So that adjustment to split flow outside zone was a nice adjustment as well. So they're really creative in that stuff, and they're still well coached within the details of those types of concepts as well.
Yeah, I think anytime like you think back to those, the Niners offenses, the McVay stuff when they were really in the late 2010s when they were really humming with the wide zone stuff, just taking the lead kind of by storm. Honestly, like it's an old concept, but they were just crushing teams with it. I think a lot of it speaks to making your counters look just like the original concept. That's your base, and like you mentioned, like the wind back stuff, it's so good because if you just like freeze frame it after those first 3 steps, it looks exactly like wide zone to the defense. And that's why it's so difficult to defend. And then when you got kind of a running back that's got like those joystick like movements like Bijan does, the ability to put his foot in the ground. Of course, that's a big, like the one cut runners are always going to be, really successful in this type of system. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that's going to be kind of interesting to me, and it's kind of a side, quick conversation, but his offenses just in the past like haven't ran much like power, a lot of duo, or anything like that. Like they run duo a little bit, but like they don't pull guards. One of the things they do on the wind back is I think they have some keys built in depending on who, maybe it's uncovered covered rules, but like
Yep,
sometimes on
yep.
the wind back they will pull either the guard or the center. Now they have a really athletic center in Atlanta. He does a really good job getting out in space, so that's kind of interesting. But I wanted to ask you, kind of pivot to like a lot of these teams, like I mentioned the Niners in the Rams, they're getting more like power gap heavy. Why do you think is that just an adjustment to what NFL defenses are doing, or why do you think there are some really good offenses kind of shifting to more of that downhill running scheme?
It's definitely a response to defense, like you talked about, like some of the wide, the wide nines. That's part of it too. That's why the Dolphins. That's not to get too sidetracked, but that's why when I studied the Dolphins the last couple of years, like everybody knew they were still trying to get to the edge on their outside zone stuff and the crack toss and the different variations they use to still accomplish that. It was something I thought was really neat, but like I said, I don't want to get too sidetracked. Um,
Right.
but yeah, I think the switch to gap schemes is more defensive. Like we're talking about the 1 high, 2 high stuff. I think the 2 high thing, right? If you're running duo and the defensive line stunting a bunch, you can wash it all down and you can still get your running back going downhill, hitting north south, on a corner fitting late or on a safety fitting late, right? Where, if you're calling outside zone, that now that ball's bouncing and then the defense can kind of push it off. You hear the expression, force the ball to roll off the pool table type
Off
of
the
thing,
table.
right? So
Yeah.
they're trying to push it sideways, use the sideline as that defender, use that extra time as the play is getting horizontal for the rest of the defense to pursue. So it's definitely a response to that.
Yeah, I think some of the lighter personnel too that we've
Yes.
seen coming out of college, like teams, just everybody's wanting guys that can rush the passer. But I felt like once we saw so many of these teams hitting everywhere across the perimeter on some of this wide zone stuff, people are targeting a lot of those athletic defensive linemen that can really run sideline to sideline, more agile guys. And now it's like, okay, like we'll just run the ball down your throat and see if these 280, 290-pound guys on the defensive line, see if they can handle a double. Seeing if we can get a double team on them to run duo or to run, gap or anything like that. In terms of like, we talked a lot about the run game, but just the play action concepts or any drop back concepts that you particularly like that Arthur uses kind of to, play off of some of his rushing concepts.
Yeah, I think, like you were talking about all the single high looks that they were getting. I would imagine with Pittsburgh, they'll be seeing a lot more single high looks just based on the scheme and the personnel.
Hmm.
That really lends well to a lot of like the traditional play action concepts, like the wide zone Shanahan McVay types, right? Like where they're isolating one or whether it's like kind of like a 1-by-1 off max protection play action or like like a slot formation where they've got 2 receivers in the concept. So like I call it the dagger stem family. So like the inside receivers kind of running a clear out, outside receivers running a deep dig. So like that's dagger. And then I've got the deep comeback variation where the inside receiver is going to run what I call a search route. He's going to sit over the ball. So it's going to look like that deep through or that deep clear where he's trying to cross the safety space, but he's going to slam on the brakes and sit down and hopefully avoid behind a hook defender that's been sucked up by play action. And that outside receiver is going to take the exact same stem he would for the dagger concept, but then he's going to kind of jab at the top and then maybe or either jab or speed cut and run a deep comeback route. So the route stem family looks, for those 2 concepts, it looks exactly the same, but if you're getting single high and one-on-ones on the outside, you can get to those concepts and, create one-on-ones for your receivers. And also too, like Arthur Smith does a good job of getting to those creatively. So he'll start, like I described, those two concepts I described are out of like a slot formation. So say it's like I
Hmm.
formation with a tight end on one side, two receivers on the other. So you can max protect, but still run a two-man concept. So you can still run that same play, but you take the outside receiver to that two receiver side. You start him on the other side of the field and you motion him fast across to kind of create like a stack on the inside receiver as the ball is being snapped. Now you're
Hmm.
getting a spray release, so you're getting a free release for that deep dig or that deep comeback, and now you're creating like that switch release at the snap of the ball. So using stuff like that, you can get real creative. You can create some confusion, create more separation for those one-on-ones. So just kind of those types of concepts. You're getting single high. Those offensive coordinators in the NFL, they've got a long list of play action concepts they can get to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I've, followed JT O'Sullivan. I've taken a lot of his courses and stuff. He tells me all the time, like everything works against cover three.
Yep,
So
yep, it's
if you
pretty
get
true.
if you can get teams to get in those regulated looks and get them in cover three, you can usually take advantage of those, post safety. Some of the stuff that I really like there he does a good job too. Like you mentioned the max protection stuff, but there's some half field reads in here and in his playbook that I feel like work pretty well. We did a video on like just some of the ways that he gets to like the sail concept, just some of the 2 and 3 man route combinations that really are easy completions or easy reads for the quarterback because he's only reading one side of the field,
Right.
and creating those easy completions. And then just off the bootleg stuff, he runs a lot of keepers. You could take advantage of, you mentioned leaving the backside edge defender unblocked. You could take advantage of that. If he's starting to, trail those backs and get tackles from behind, you could take advantage of him and, bootleg out. He's had some, the thing I come back to about his like play action stuff is, he wants to push the ball down the field. So if you got an
Yes.
offensive coordinator that's really run heavy, especially if you're getting cover three, wants to push the ball down the field, I think probably like my favorite or the most common one that I've seen him use is, you mentioned those like stack formations. He almost uses, I don't know what I would even call it, but it's almost like a double post kind of concept
Yep.
where
Yep. Are you thinking of
um
the one week? It was against Detroit. It was early in the game where Ritter
yeah,
missed Pitts deep. Yeah, that was a sweet.
yeah.
That was a sweet design. Yep.
And like you think a double post about how good that is really against like quarters. Like we see a lot, like you're seeing more and more quarters in the NFL. Like double post is
Yep.
really good against that. But if you get those tight splits in the stack, like you can get the free release, but also if you're getting cover three, which is like what teams will kind of base out of against those tight splits, that corner is usually sitting outside leverage. So you can really have that inside post kind of run the deep post off and then use the outside receiver to kind of run some type of crosser or deep post or whatever. And you got, a leverage advantage on that guy. So there's a lot of cool stuff that I feel like I like. In terms of Atlanta, I think there's personnel, takeaways from that. They've had some struggles at quarterback really since Matt Ryan. But why do you think that things didn't work in Atlanta? Like what are some basic problems that you were noticing with this offense, like when you were studying them last year?
Yeah, obviously this list is not all encompassing, and I'm certainly not going to blame, kind of the fall of his tenure there on any of these things. But these are the things that I noticed, right? So like Kyle Pitts just didn't quite look right. That play that we were talking about,
Hmm.
that deep post that they threw to him, right? Most tight ends aren't running your deep post route, so either.
Very, very unique. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So and Ritter overthrew him on that one particular snap that we were discussing, and whether he was injured or he was being misused, however that falls in there, like it just didn't look right with Kyle Pitts last year, and obviously, he was a top 5 pick the year before or 2 years before, so like, you got to land on those picks.
Absolutely.
So that's one of them. Busts in the route, busts like within the route concept. So like there would be times where like I'd look at a play and I'm like, okay, well this looks like this concept, but this receiver did something different and the quarterback looked there and it just didn't look right, right? So like either the depth was off or there some of the details sometimes popped out to me as not as consistent as they should be. And then even in the run game, like busts like with the mic point or something, right? So like say the offensive line, say the play side guard and play side tackle on outside zone are working up to the mic, right? Well, if that's the case, then the backside combination between the backside guard and center should reach back to the will. Well, if you've got both of them working to the mic, then you've got an unblocked will, shooting through the backside B gap or something of that nature. So like stuff like that, like unblocked second level defenders or just miscommunications up front sometimes. And something else I noticed too that Arthur Smith is a big fan of is repeat play calls. So like you'll see that a lot, in the Atlanta tape. And I'm wondering if you'll see that with Pittsburgh too, is like he'll call something like 4 or 5 times, like even like run concepts. All the good teams do that. Like
Right.
they go into the game with like a set of core runs, but then like their third down passes will all be different. Their red zone stuff will all be different. There were a lot of times where I remember the Tampa Bay game last year for Atlanta. I think the one in Tampa. I can't remember what week it was. There was like a 4 strong like spot dig concept that they were running. That first time they ran it, Ritter just ripped the ball. It looked perfect. But every time they called it, the window got tighter, 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 and like I can't remember how many times they completed it later in the game, but they called it at least 4 or 5 times. And that's pretty rare for an NFL team to call like the exact same pass concept that many times in a game. Right or wrong, I don't know, but that's just it's relatively unique. So
Yeah.
those are just a few things that I noticed.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a good point. Like with the Pitts thing, I actually had Pat Fryermuth on the channel. We kind of had some conversations about Kyle's usage, and they're pretty close, so it does give you a little bit of a illumination on how he could be used. But Pitts is a unicorn in the fact that he was a top 5 pick. We don't see that a lot from tight ends, but he really was not healthy over the past 2 years. I mean, I think you can look just at him physically and see how he was moving, like really since that injury 2 years ago. It just looks different than when he was a rookie. He went over 1,000 yards or whatever. And then you mentioned there's a lot of times where things that kind of kept popping up to me were there were some coaching related, some player the player scheme things. I feel like are pretty easy for everybody to pick up. You can see where they were weak. I mean, they clearly wanted to avoid getting into a lot of true passing sets, like with their offensive line. They had some struggles there. Quarterback play was an issue. Secondary receiving options weren't great in terms of having one-on-one winners. But some of the things that I noticed, just coaching points, you would have guys that would be running the clear out. So, for example, if that's Kyle Pitts, well, he's not running full speed. Now, whether if that's if that's his injury or if that's like kind of just a little bit laziness, but there was a lot of those deep dagger concepts that you were talking about earlier, where the guy running the clear out's not clearing any space for that
Right.
dig to come underneath. And then something too, like with some of the like the high lows, the spot digs and stuff like that. I think I'm not. What does Shanahan call those? The bangs or anything like that? Like any of the high lows, I felt like the spacing was sometimes off, where
Yes.
they weren't
Yep.
getting the underneath defender. They weren't getting the underneath route out into the route quick enough to exactly like pull that second level defender down for the dig or the bang to hit behind it. And then you mentioned the repeat play calls. I just watched that Tampa Bay game, and that's like one of the things that definitely I noticed too. That first dig that you're talking about, like Ritter ripped that, and I have some questions about just the quarterbacks that Pittsburgh has on the roster right now with Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. They're not really guys that want to throw over the middle of the field a ton. So that's
Right.
the other question in terms of how is all this going to work. But yeah, there's definitely some questions that I have about the passing game. I think the running game stuff, like having a good foundation, like you mentioned, the repeat run concepts is not a problem to me as long as you teach it well. And outside zone in particular is really like almost like an art or a dance. Like if you get guys a lot of repetition, they will naturally get better at it. It's just a matter of finding those passing concepts that I think make sense to kind of complement those. But
Yeah, I didn't want to gloss over Desmond Ritter's struggles either. And I definitely wanted to
yeah,
interject real quick with that, just because obviously he did struggle a lot last year. That was
sure.
big. That was a big part of it too.
Yeah, accuracy. I mean, accuracy's always been a thing with Ritter, even dating back to Cincinnati. Like there are some good flashes in terms of the things that he could do with his legs, and I actually think Ritter, like when he was coming out, one of the smartest quarterbacks. Like in the last couple of classes, he knows where to go with the ball. But even then, like some of the decision makings he makes, the hero ball moments, he was terrible in the red zone. That was another big issue for them
Yes,
last year. But
they'd have
uh,
1 or 2 huge fumbles a game in the red zone. It was
yeah,
just infuriating.
yeah, it was terrible. He has some good stuff in the red zone too. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, so I guess like my last like kind of question that I have for you is before I get you out of here. Do you think that he'll succeed, in Pittsburgh? And then are there any like specific tweaks? Because when coordinators get their second or third chance, in the league, it's always interesting to see how guys kind of like reinvent themselves in a way. Like, what are some tweaks you think Arthur really needs to make in order to make this stop a successful one and potentially propel himself into another head coaching opportunity?
Yeah, definitely like not a redesign, but kind of like a retool, a refocus of some of the drop back pass stuff. I think incorporating Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, however that shakes out, like what that looks like. I mean, I'm sure that's I'm not breaking any news here, but how the quarterback situation works out with the rest of it, because he can figure out the run game. I think Pittsburgh's got some tools, especially, on the offensive line to make this thing go on the run game. So I think, how that looks from that standpoint with the quarterbacks. I mean, can they do it? Yeah, they can. Obviously, that's definitely remained to be seen.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how it all plays out. I mean, you mentioned just like the quarterback run game stuff. I'm really interested to see what they do with Justin because Art does a lot of zone read stuff in the red zone, which is something we're gonna go over on the channel. But like I'm interested to see like what tweaks on that. Especially, I think the big question marks was beyond just like a more robust and giving the quarterback more answers in the drop back passing game is I want to see how if he implements maybe a little bit more gap, a little bit more pullers to really kind of accentuate some of the offensive linemen that the Steelers have that are really good pullers. I mean, they've got a good pull in center now. They've got both guards. Broderick Jones, they ran a lot of those like dark concepts, which is just one back power from the gun. They were really good at that last year. I'm interested to see if that stays. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a good thing for the Steelers because they were looking for a play caller that's had a little bit of success in the NFL. He's got experience, and I feel like they got that with Arthur Smith. But it's going to be really fun to figure out if it works one way or another. But I appreciate you jumping on with me, man. I want to give you the floor to promote your stuff, tell people where they can find you and your work. And then, like I said earlier, man, I'm going to link everything in the description so you guys can go follow and go, buy, purchase, follow Bobby's stuff and, hopefully take good use of that.
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on Twitter. My handle is at B_Peters12. I write complete offensive manuals. So what it basically is I watch every single snap of a team during the season. I'll cut it up. I'll put it into a spreadsheet, and I'll write a book based on concepts. So I'll group the plays together as concepts, right? And I'll diagram every variation they run. I'll chart. I'll have a table like for all the instances they ran it, and then I'll kind of break it down into like a simpler table for like average yards per play. On first down, second and short, second and medium. Third down conversion rate, red zone for conversion percentage, like to kind of give it some context. And then I'll explain what the play is. I'll kind of draw up like any necessary diagrams to kind of show like what it is and what it's all about. And then I'll talk about why it worked and why it didn't work for that team during that season. And I go through and I'll break up. I end up breaking down probably 75 or 80% of the team's, plays from the year, stuff that they ran, at least, the floor I try to use is like, 5 or 6 times they call it. If they call something once or twice during the year, it usually doesn't get included in the book just because, it would take me, 3 more months to write it. And then it would, probably be 600 pages long. So I do that. I write some game planning books too. So like teams that I've already written books on, I'll take a season and I'll kind of cherry pick what I want to talk about. So there I can really go down rabbit holes with like one-off variations. Like I started doing this with the Niners with Shanahan because they go down so many rabbit holes with some of their concepts in it. I was just like, I want to write about this stuff, but it doesn't really fit into like the manual format. So that's how I started doing the game planning books. So those are fun as well. And then I started a Substack last year. It's called Alert the Post. I post stuff on there. I've been doing a lot of cut-ups lately on there. So like, 10, 15-minute cut-ups of concepts that I talk about in the books too. But yeah, those are probably the best places to find what I do.
Yeah, I definitely recommend.
The books are all on Amazon.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll link the description, for that for the Amazon stuff and the Substack because last summer, the summer for me is like it's a downtime for like content creators or people that cover the sport, but really for me, I use it as a time to kind of like learn more about the game. So I try to read as much as I can. Last year I actually read your book I read the Jags manual and then I read the Lions manual as well. Those were 2 really good ones. The Lions do a ton of like it was really cool to see how much like many different ways that they can do their like gap stuff. Their power stuff is awesome. I mean, they have a really unique player in Penei Sewell. Like they can use him almost as a weapon on the offensive line. But those are really good manuals to learn from. I'm looking forward to getting the Texans one. I know you just published that. So like the Texans kind of, Slowick has the Shanahan. He's from the Shanahan branch as well. And just before I get you out of here, man, is there I know you've done some stuff on LaFleur, but is LaFleur, you think, the closest to like the Smith kind of branch? I know like there are some Shanahan, we talked about some of the Shanahan branches like kind of intermingling. Do you see any similarities between him and like any of the other guys that you've studied?
I think Matt LaFleur in Green Bay, I think the similarity to Arthur Smith that you could draw is zone duo.
Yeah,
That's, and McVay kind of a little bit too. Where they don't like to pull guys, where Shanahan will pull guys, Slowick will pull guys. They'll run power, they'll run counter.
right.
I think I don't want to oversimplify it, because obviously they do pull people, here and there, like they run crack toss and stuff. But I
Right.
think those are two, like that's the tenant, that's like the foundation of the offense, like the wide zone duo, and LaFleur runs a little bit more inside zone than probably Arthur Smith does. But as far as like pass game stuff, same family, but they go so, they go down different, even just the way they run daggers. So like daggers, a common, pass call in both offenses. Like, I was cutting up some Packers tape, the last week or so, and they run like their version. They have a few different versions of dagger, but they run it like 8-10 times a game, and
Right.
they pair it with different concepts and whatever, and the way they do it, and even like the depth of the route, right? Like they'll run it a lot of times at like 12 yards, where like Arthur Smith's pushing that thing to 15 to 18
15.
yards. Like the coaching point traditionally on dagger for that route is, I know this is an old Andy Reid coaching point with it, is cross 3 lines. So it's at least a 15-yard route. Well, when that route's breaking under 15 yards, I'm like, okay, they're coaching this differently. And the quarterback's footwork's different too. They're shaving 2 steps off their drop. So even within like a concept that looks very similar, like sometimes they coach it differently for different reasons, right? They're trying to get the ball out of the quarterback's hands faster. They're trying to time it up with something else, maybe a route to the other side of the field. But I get that's a long-winded answer to your short, quick question.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's good context. I mean, I think it's good. Like I said, I always encourage like Steeler fans too. Like, a lot of people get hyper fixated on trying to, learn more about the game or just only fixate on content that's surrounding their team that they like or the team that they cover. And I think that's, you're selling yourself short because there's so many resources out there like yourself that can, teach you a lot about the game and try to see, a lot of what to expect on Sunday. So I appreciate you joining, man. Appreciate everybody for tuning into the episode. Please make sure that you give Bobby a follow. Make sure you consume some more of his content. Really grateful that he hopped on here. As always, please make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop me a comment on what you guys thought of the video, and I will holler at you guys next time. Peace and love.